thought, so we can proceed, we can go on. I'm honored to chair this session. I'm doubly honored because it's an honor to chair this session, but because of the presence of ladies, because in the first sessions they were absent, and now they are going to take their revenge. They will take their revenge, I'm sure they will take their revenge on men. Now, our first presenter is Dr. Buller from the University of Shahid Bukhari in Jeddah. I will not introduce him. I just like to, but he has long been in the field of ELT, many years. He has contributed a lot, not only locally, but nationally, and then internationally. Let me, just before I say anything, could we try to make this as short as possible so that we have maybe a chance to have discussions, and then we'll go for lunch, because there is an afternoon session which starts early, so please bear with us and then just go to the essential things. Dr. Bulla is going to talk about professional development, a survey of teachers' attitudes. I think this is going to be interesting because it is based on a survey of teachers' attitudes. And this issue of teachers' attitudes has been already mentioned directly and indirectly concerning a number of things, and I think we'll be pleased to hear what Sibula has to say about this. The floor is yours, Sibula. What should be working?
Sometimes that we can use it, for discussion probably. So in fact, our presentation. So it's a presentation that I prepared along with a colleague of mine, Professor Laboudi, who is not here. So I'm delivering the paper. So it's about, I just want to tell you that I'm no better than Professor Karim, so I haven't done much reading, really, to be honest with you, but I'm speaking out of experience. I'm just reporting what other people have said. So again, to get to know what the attitudes of the teachers at university are. So directly to the outline. So we'll try to present our view of what professional development is, then talk about the legal text and their reference to professional development before moving to the study, and then we'll conclude by some remarks that have part of these. Some of these remarks have already been mentioned in previous presentations. So directly to the definition. So there is a background that I'd like to share with you, and that's something that for the last decades, the Moroccan educational reform, the Moroccan educational system has witnessed a number of reforms. And these reforms, were targeted towards improving the educational system and making the student the center of focus. But at the same time, the educational reforms have probably set the pace for teachers really to update their knowledge, and of course, because they are also contributors to the field of education, there is their share, and of course their share cannot be really positive unless the success of these reforms is contingent on their active participation, and of course in their update of the knowledge and the practices. So the definition we adhere to are mainly definitions by Grant and Fullan. So the basic really idea of professional development is that it is the sum total of formal and informal. And this is very important. It's not something new, and colleagues have already talked about that before. But that's something that I'd like to stress on. It's the combination of both formal and informal learning experiences from the beginning of a teaching career up to the retiring age. So retiring age, of course, I mean, is probably, and you continue maybe even after, although you're not officially recognized as a teacher, but things continue with that. So that's the context where the definition for professional development is set. Now the second point I'd like to talk about relates to the legal text. So where the reference to professional development in the legal text is. So let's see especially the bulletin officiel numéro 4458, so referring to les enseignants-chercheurs. And here, I asked the question to Professor Gig about, we as university professors, we should not concentrate mainly on teaching, but also on doing research, and that's something that I have always advocated. And in fact, I always consider myself as I have not been able to find a suitable and appropriate translation for the term Ustad Bahith or enseignant-chercheur. So people speak about like researcher, teacher, researcher. For me, that does not really entail what the Arabic expression Ustad Bahith means. So is there priority? Are we teaching? Are we first teachers and then researchers? Or are we both? And of course that answers your, in fact, that's something you said, and you said that it's a combination. There is overlap between the two, and that's the idea I'm supporting. There is also reference to the legal, in the legal text, to professional development, in the following quote, which shows that university teachers can benefit from, sabbatical leave, a sabbatical leave just for the purpose of, doing some training. And here, for me, training means like improving the quality, doing research, improve, and of course the quality of teaching as well. And of course the research and teaching go hand in hand. So next we move on to the study itself. So set within the context, the legal text, so of course insist on teachers having to have some training, and of course then would like to see whether the attitudes of teachers really reflect what the legal texts say. So the objectives of our study is first to survey the attitudes of teachers. Okay? Teachers of the English department. And of course, I chose in fact, the initial project intended to explore the attitudes of not just teachers of the English department, but other departments. As probably we'll have to talk about later when we talk about the research design. The second objective, and that changed a little bit from what I said from the beginning and the abstract that you have, is to offer suggestions on how a teacher professional development program should be. In fact, we were very ambitious, at the beginning, And we said that we want to conceptualize an in-service training that meets the needs of teachers. In fact, that's what we're still working on, but I think I'll leave the Professor Halim is going to talk after me, and she's going to deal with that aspect of research. Next, the research questions. So in order to attain these objectives, a number of research questions will have to be answered by the end of this presentation. So what are university teachers' attitudes towards professional development? That's the essential of the presentation itself. The second research question is how is professional development related to teachers' professional identity? So does it, establish teachers' professional identity or not? The third is related somehow to the policy makers. So we've probably talked about that before, but how do policymakers conceive of professional development? So we have a legal text reference to that, and what is it that these policymakers have made to, assist teachers in their professional development? The method, in order to answer these questions, so we followed a survey research design with 25 teachers from 6 English departments. And of course, I should not be biased here, because not all the English departments were approached, not for any reason, but it's just a matter of prioritizing things. So this is something that will come pretty soon after the conference. So the questionnaire was used, and of course the overall picture of the universities involved. So of course the list is given in front of you, and of course this is not, this is to tell you that in fact the sample is not really, it cannot be, it's not representative. Of course, whatever the number is, but the research is at its first stages, and of course a number of variables will have to be taken into consideration so later on. So the findings, in fact, so the research questions, we somehow divided into 2 parts. There is the characteristic parts, and of course this I'm going to go over that very quickly. So the teaching experience, so we have a number of the teaching experience, ranges from 5 to 20 years or over. And then we have the academic degree, mainly doctoral data holders and doctoral holders, in addition to master and BOS holders. So of course there's a pre-service training. I mean, this is what I refer to as characteristics. So again, so I'll skip over that and go directly to question 6 about attitudes. As you can see, I mean, I don't probably put too much focus on the numbers there, but in general there is a unanimous agreement about the usefulness of pre-service training. If it is there, it's good. I'm going to refer to Professor that experience. He said they had pre-service training, but that was not enough. This needs to be developed. Of course, these are the aspects, pre-service training focused on a number of different aspects like technology, teaching methodology, the use of technology, and so on and so forth. So I'm going to stop only at those slides that I think are very important for discussion. Now the training update, the participants update the training either formally through personal and professional activities or informally through practice, and that's the idea I advocated from the very beginning. And practice is a term that was used by Professor Mallouk. Of course, that's how we update our knowledge informally. And in fact, we do that, among colleagues, especially we talk about experience, whether experience is very important in professional development. Experience for me does not mean that, you share it, you go to someone who is, who's been there before you. So experience could simply mean someone who's got expertise in a particular domain, though he has not worked as a long years as you have. The willingness to take this Q9, that refers to the question. So 72% of the teachers show that their readiness for in-service training as opposed to 12. I mean, you can see the majority, yeah, but there is still a considerable number of teachers who say no, we don't want to. Maybe this is the category of teachers that resist change and do not say, okay, fine, we don't have the available material, we don't have the logistics, so why go for that, for an in-service training? So the relevant training areas, so I'm not going to stop at that, but of course, those who said no for in-service training said that because, of, issues related to funding and appropriate opportunities. So I'll skip that and go directly to the relationship between teacher development and professional identity. So to 76% of the participant, teacher professional identity means keeping up to date with matters relating to teaching. Of course, if this does anything or says anything, it corroborates the ideas that have already been, proposed before, that focus is mainly on teaching. So I think I'll move directly to the discussion. The survey results indicate that those teachers, those who have pre-service training and those without any pre-service, agree on the fact that teacher professional development is very important for updating their teaching methodology, developing their teaching skills, and of course keeping up with the new trends. So again, to sum up the discussion, is like most of the discussion centered around the fact of whether or not teacher professional development in higher education should focus on teaching or research. So let me quote this. First, it helps to not like the idea espoused by Hervé Diony. These are people who belong to, who work with me, and we work with him as I'm doing some propaganda at the same time. They advocate the idea that teaching is prioritized. But of course, there is the other viewpoint, which is that teaching should be directed, research should be directed to teaching. And this is what I mean by action research. So here is one of the quotes from our respondents: teachers at university are researchers, so they survive by research. So the concluding remarks, for us is like we have to have a teacher development program that combines both, that talks about teacher development program that is directed towards teaching and research. Okay, so of course we have the funds, through the Bourse de Mobilité, so of course this is legally, it's there, they are there, but the way you get them, that's a bit problematic. We have to explore at least this, what is available to us through the legal text, and see what we can do with that. So for a teacher development program, it should consist, enable teachers to meet, the program should meet the teacher's professional needs and expectations. So this is what I refer to as self-directed development. It should also focus on both teaching and research. It should allow for a regular update on the teacher's knowledge and skills in research and teaching. It should get teachers to work in group, and it's very important. So we talked about groups, so I think it's time that we again talked about mine as one of the Moroccan networks, right? And finally, we should foster the linkages among teachers and promote collegiality. So if teachers coordinate and share mutual experiences, that's something that is going to be really good and beneficial to professional development. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sibylle. I know that I've been pressing you, but
it's good that you did. Otherwise, then we'll forget about it.
Anyway, it was clear. I think that bringing up those two issues, the attitudes of teachers. Now, on the same line of attitudes, Professor Siraj, and this is by the way, this is a good thing. I commend the organizing committee for varying the presenters from different universities. And this is an interesting thing. So we moved from Jedida to Fez, next door, Professor Siraj, who is going to talk about attitudes.
Okay, good morning,
Yeah.
ladies and
So the floor is yours.
Yeah,
Just
thank you
correct
very
me.
much.
Go ahead.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I would like to thank Dr. Larousse. Where is he? There you are. I would like to thank you for providing me with the opportunity to participate and take part in this interesting conference. And also, I would like to say that I'm honored to meet my professor, Dr. Wakrim Mohammed. I'm so happy to see him after 6 years after getting my LA. And since I'm talking about the teacher model, I consider you as my teacher or my role model in this lecture. So thank you very much indeed. So this morning my PowerPoint presentation betrayed me, so I'm lucky to have the hard copy. This presentation is about attitudes toward the teacher as a role model to his or her students in the classroom. So a case study in Fez, Morocco. So the presentation is divided into two parts. The first one tackles tentative definitions of three key words. For instance, professional development, teacher development, and effective teaching. And then I will move on to provide an overview of the major characteristics of a role model teacher. Okay? As for the second part, tackles teachers and student attitudes towards the teacher as a role model to his or her students in the classroom. So I provided two data collection procedures. One questionnaire. A questionnaire has been divided to teachers and students so that I could get a variety of data from them. And then participant observation, but I was unlucky this morning because the recording didn't work. I'm so disappointed. But I'm going to sum up my students' point of views at the end of the paper in a list of recommendations. Okay, now let's move on to the three keywords. For example, professional development. According to Najjar, 2009, page 5, professional development is associated with the perceptions and procedures of being a lifetime apprentice, a lifetime learner. It is a non-stop enlightenment of professional awareness and the development of professional proficiency all the way through an individual's life vocation. It is also an essential necessity for the sake of assuring a continuous existence and value in any occupation. According to Wallace 1991, page 7, teacher training or teacher education is a tool that could be provided by experts in the field of teaching, whereas teacher development could be achieved by the teacher himself or herself. As for teacher development, according to Njari, 2009, page 15, teacher development is about coping with the requirements of the teacher in ways that fit him or her. It is not restricted to teaching nor to language teaching. It is also about the development of a language and assistance competence, confidence building, meditation, cultural expansion. However, if teachers do not take control of their teaching career, they could encounter pressure, become exhausted, and they may even stagnate. For example, they experience stress, particularly in their first years of teaching, or they burn out, especially at the moment when they are no more capable to be acquainted with internal or external demands are reaction to chronic stress, or they stagnate, that is to say they do not develop themselves professionally. Also, it is always argued that teaching is a challenging job in the sense that it demands an energy which could be either physical, psychological, and intellectual. Teaching is considered as an emotionally exhausting profession because students require giving from their teachers. However, it can also be worthwhile as long as teachers are eager to grow and expand their capacities, knowledge, and go hand in hand to satisfy their students' academic needs. As for the third keyword, which is reflexive practice or reflective teaching, according to Farrell 2007, page 4, reflective practice refers to the moment when teachers begin to think about their work before teaching, at the moment when they teach, and after they finish teaching in the classroom. It consists of ephemeral reflections which are centered on guesses and instincts or some actions which occur in the classroom. It signifies more than momentary thoughts before, during, and after a given lesson. It stands for assessing what the teacher does in class and the reason behind doing it. In an attempt to get engaged to reflective practice, teachers ought to gather information about what occurred in the classroom, then they try to investigate and explore this information, and after that they relate it to their basic statements and beliefs so that they can add suitable amendments and enhancements in their teaching. As for the characteristics of a reflective practice or reflective teacher, I will provide brief characteristics. According to Henderson, 1992, page 15, there are a number of characteristics that teachers ought to adopt in their teaching process. For instance, the ethics of caring. Teachers ought to care about their students and to appreciate them ethically. Ethics of caring may occur when the teacher takes time to listen and to support his or her students. This could be achieved through a dialogue. The latter is considered an effective tool where both teachers and students take part in a truthful and exposed communication, since it is regarded as a recent and basic tool of learning. Ethics of caring could also exist when teachers and students work in a cooperative way. That is to say, teachers ought to act as advisors and counselors in their students in their subjects of study. As for the second characteristic, which is the constructivist approach to teaching, reflective teachers take into account the link between what he or she is attempting to teach and students' backgrounds and individual interests in addition to vital skills and academic content. Students are regarded as vigorous participants throughout the learning process. Also, from constructivist point of view, learning is multifaceted instruction which involves the past experience of every student in addition to his or her personal objectives and the necessities of the subject matter. Then we have artistic problem solving. According to Henderson 192, page 6 and 8, it inquires liberally about adjusting the syllabus to students' personal backgrounds, interests, and requirements. Their capacity to look for new methodologies to get students' involvement. Their aptitude to continuously implement positive judgments on their students so that they could build a good quality education. The capability also to find ways to promote an active and significant learning process. As for the fourth one, it's about the love of teaching. According to Seckner and Liston, 1996, page 6 and 8, teaching is a vocation which involves both thinking and feeling. It has to be regarded as a mission in which an individual is passionately committed to. They also state that good teachers discover the right methods so that they could combine their passion, conviction, and judgments in their teaching. So let's move on now to the practical part. Concerning teachers' attitudes toward the teacher as a role model to his or her students in the classroom, the aim behind the questionnaire is to reflect whether teachers think that they consider themselves as role model teachers. the ones who care about the students' learning procedures, the ones who are expected to adopt convenient teaching methodologies so that the students could be provided with effective learning skills. Thus, 100 copies of the questionnaires have been handed to university professors who belong to a number of public institutions, for example, Sidi Mohammed bin Abdullah University, Faculty of Letters and Human Sciences, Muhammad Asfar, Faculty of Law, and Faculty of Economy, as well as ESC, which is the Superior School of Technology. Also, the questionnaire has been carried out in English and French, so that you could get a higher amount of feedback from university professors in that. So I'm going to go through the major questions because of time management. My question was, how do you improve your teaching skills? I provided them with 3 alternatives. Is it through attending internship abroad? Is it through colleagues counseling or workshops and conferences? So the majority of my respondents believe that they improve their teaching skills through attending and participating in workshops and conferences in Morocco and abroad. However, 20% claim that they often attend internships abroad, whereas 15% say that they improve themselves through consulting their colleagues as scholars so as to benefit from their professional experiences too. Then I asked them about the teaching approaches which they used in the classroom. Is it traditional method or modern method? So most of them claim that they use modern teaching methods more than the traditional one because the former provide them with considerable inputs and they can go hand in hand with all the various types of students' learning strategies. They also claim that students do relate to the modern methods since they are exposed to them in their everyday life. Also, I asked them whether they take into account their students' needs and interests in designing the curriculum. 100% opted for yes. They say that one of them points out the following, I quote, I had the opportunity to teach at homeland and abroad English for specific purposes that focuses mainly on students' needs and aspirations within the course. These very needs should be known prior through students' assessment and evaluation. Then during the teaching operation, the teacher has to adopt and adapt himself or herself pedagogically according to the background of his or her students. One of them also states the most vital aim in teaching is to motivate students and to draw their attention and arouse their curiosity towards the subject we are teaching. To do that, we need to find ways to relate the students' needs, real needs and interests to the classroom atmosphere, so that they can feel that the classroom and the learning process as a whole is not strange or weird. Then I asked them about whether they help their students in solving their learning problems. 100% opted for yes. One of them states, among the teacher's essential roles in the classroom setting is that he or she is an observer and a learning problem solver. To fulfill these roles, the teacher first notices that he or she then he or she tries to find out a way to help students' development in their learning styles and strategies. As for the final question, I asked them whether you like your job and the mission as a teacher. 100% opted for yes. They state that that it is an exciting job and it provides them with a good living. One of them states, I always teach with a smile on my face and a joke from time to time. Through time also, teaching becomes an enjoyable activity rather than a heavy duty. Another one states, I believe that the nature of the job is tiresome, but I like being a teacher because it is a noble career. So to conclude, the majority of my respondents, teachers, seem to be examples of role model teachers in the sense that they adopt the 4 major characteristics of the reflective teacher. For example, concerning the first one, which is the ethics of caring, all my respondents believe that they do care about their students' needs and interests in the classroom. As for the constructivist approach to teaching, they illustrate that their methods of teaching vary from traditional to modern, though the second one is the one which is more welcomed to the students as it makes the lesson more comprehensible than the traditional one of teaching. In addition to this, they may change their methods of teaching for the sake of getting their students involved in the classroom. As for the art of problem solving, teachers argue that they can continuously advise their students on how to learn and understand a given topic or a subject. They claim that they are always present for their students. Finally, concerning the love of teaching, most of my respondents obviously state that they would not have spent decades in the field of education and teaching if they do not like what they are doing. As for students' perceptions towards the same issue, the purpose behind this investigation is mainly to reveal whether students have a role model teacher, the one who cares about his or her students, their learning procedures, the one who is expected to adopt convenient teaching methodologies so that his or her students could be provided with an effective learning skills. Besides, the questionnaire has been carried out in English and then translated only into French and Arabic, so as to reach a great number of students. So,
conclude, please.
yes? Okay. So to conclude, I'll give you general conclusions about students' perceptions. Let's go. So the majority of my students believe that their teachers often care about them in the classroom. They do not have the right to judge their teachers due to the huge number of students in class. They also state that teachers change frequently their teaching methodology so that the students could take part and be active in the classroom. Besides, students clarify that their teachers ought not to criticize them openly in the classroom so that their classmates will not make fun of them. Also, they point out that there are some teachers who are so generous in the sense that they always advise them and guide them whenever they feel stuck or whenever they do not understand certain issues in the subject matter. Lastly, concerning the love of teaching, students claim that teaching is a noble mission. Also, teachers would not teach for decades if they do not love what they are doing. As for the tentative recommendations, these are the following. Teachers ought to take into account the 4 major characteristics and apply them to the lecturer and to the superiors. They ought to ask about their students' feedback or evaluation at the end of the term, year, or at the end of the semester, so as to improve their teaching skills. They also ought to be cooperative and understanding in addition to the hard work, a fact which would benefit their students so much. Also, teachers ought to take in part in different workshops which are related to teaching. They ought to organize more international conferences so that teachers can exchange their ideas. Also, the more teachers meet, the more likely they would be successful in their teaching. Lastly, teachers have got to be in contact and avoid setting distance between them and their students. And thank you very much.
Thank you. So directly we'll move to our third speaker, and from attitudes towards, from Fez we'll go to Nimler. And from attitudes, and thank you for this surveys, both of you, Sibuldan and Saraj. Now, a word that was mentioned earlier on, which I like personally, is collegiality, and I think we should thank our third speaker, Professor Saida Hadid, for touching upon this, which is, I think, an important aspect of the teacher profession among teachers, how to promote collegiality. The floor is yours. Could you make it as short as possible, please? As we are, pressed by time. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Professor Larousse, for giving me this opportunity to take part in this great event. Actually, yes, it's a bit more specific. I'm going to talk about collegiality among university teachers.
Now the other one.
Okay, so I guess for professional development, the previous presentations have already mentioned a lot of benefits, and among which I have these. It can enhance teachers' competence. It enhances also, or it updates teaching skills and approaches, and at the same time it allows teachers to exchange information and expertise and many other benefits. But this would not actually be possible, or it would be hard, if not impossible, without working on relationships. So to improve those relationships, one way to improve those relationships is to promote collegiality among university teachers. So this presentation will try to identify the concepts related to collegiality, to explore what makes collegiality desirable in higher education, and finally to suggest some activities that can promote collegial relationships. So teachers' isolation, and I guess Professor, you have already mentioned this term, in classroom is no longer relevant. It accounts for many of the failures we see in schools, and as researchers have found, it has been held responsible for teachers' anxiety about their effectiveness and their fearfulness of external evaluation. So therefore, releasing these teachers from this isolation and shifting to collegiality is a prerequisite to securing educational change. Actually, collegiality has become one of the hottest issues in higher education. So to gain more understanding of this term, let's explore some concepts related to collegiality. So collegiality refers to people working with each other. It is often imbued with a positive value that refers to support, to stimulation among peers for the purpose of enhancing and developing both personally and professionally. It is a give and take process between colleagues. But what comes to our minds when we say relation between working together, and the relation between colleagues is collaboration and congeniality. So congeniality, or congenial milieu, is always friendly, sociable, convivial. It is desirable, actually. It's when people get along, when they have friendly relationships, and these relationships are characterized by having tea or coffee together, and smiles and laughter, etc. Collaboration describes cooperative actions and implies working with others, sharing ideas to achieve a common goal. These two terms actually do not exactly mean collegiality. Collegiality remains vague and open to multiple interpretation. So collegiality goes beyond congenial relationships to reach educational and professional purposes. Congeniality remains the base. We say that these friendly relationships are required, but they are basic to collegiality. So collegiality could not flourish in a school without congeniality, without those friendly relationships. However, congeniality is, as Barth says, is not educationally substantive or deeply nourishing. A shift, therefore, from congeniality to collegiality is necessary for teachers' development. Again, collegiality refers to the quality of the relationships among peers, not just the act. I said not just, it is the act of collaborating, but not just the act of collaborating together. So while collaboration refers to actions, what we do, collegiality refers to a way of thinking, a spirit that actually that we need in higher education. So the act of collaboration, collaborating and cooperating is a reflection of that spirit. When we collaborate, when we cooperate, when we do things, we reflect, we are collegial, or we reflect collegial relations. So these two terms, however, are used interchangeably in the literature because they have much in common, and because both of them imply an environment or a setting where educators work collaboratively and cooperatively with each other. So what makes collegiality desirable in higher education? Here I have some common types of class or teachers' behaviors that we are familiar with. The first one is when teachers work on their own, when they are isolated in their classrooms. What do? They prepare courses, exams, they handle students' problems and classroom management, etc. They conduct research, but without consulting their peers. This isolation is not, as you say, Professor, is not bad, or it doesn't mean that it doesn't give a good result or the teacher is bad, but it is not as rewarding and beneficial as working in a team with a collegial character. So the second, and this isolation leads to a second behavior, which is the lack of professional communication between colleagues. This communication, or colleagues content themselves with those congenial relationships which are not really enough to reach collegiality. So the first and the second behaviors are not really satisfactory and do not yield good results. So a third, or an alternative is needed. So the third behavior that we want is working in a collegial environment. There are many activities that we can use. So this is, how can university teachers get involved? Actually, there are many activities, and because of time constraints, I have chosen just two to talk about. The first one is the teacher support groups, and I guess it has already been elaborated by Professor Crouet. It involves a group of teachers meeting to discuss anything, to talk about concerns, problems, and experiences. Teachers, through these groups, can have regular discussions about students' progress, problems, curriculum, and material development, course planning and testing, and the classroom management. This support group is integral for allowing teachers to work in a safe milieu that supports growth and enlarges their knowledge. And these teachers can be experienced or novice. Actually, this activity maintains the creativity, enthusiasm, and interest of experienced teachers in their profession. At the same time, it helps novice teachers to gain experience and knowledge from more experienced teachers. So this support, actually in this support group, collegiality manifests itself in the ability to sit back and listen to their peers, and the ability to have empathy in the sense of understanding and sharing their peers' feelings. The second activity, which to some extent is overlooked in higher education, is peer observation, which refers to regular visits between colleagues, of colleagues' classrooms. And collegial relationships will enable you to practice this activity to perceive this observation not as judgmental, threatening, or intrusive, but as a way to provide feedback and gain understanding of teaching and learning. Learn from peers to improve teaching and gain confidence. Encourage better lesson preparation. Provide the mirror in which the teacher can see his or her reflection. And finally, to break down classroom isolation and routine practices. To practice these activities, it is necessary for teachers to develop trust and mutual respect. Trust is at the center of these collegial relations. And as Harris and Anthony argue, teachers should be comfortable sharing self-doubts without feeling like a failure. At the same time, celebrate their successes without feeling arrogant. Well, collegial activities, this is a point I would like to raise here, is that these collegial activities should come from teachers and by teachers. We don't want what Hargreaves named contrived collegiality, which is according to which teachers collaborating working relationships are not spontaneous, not voluntary, but administratively regulated and compulsory. This kind of collegiality does not contribute to the development of teachers. As a matter of fact, collegiality cannot be imposed. So, collaborative collegiality is actually spirit of collaborative collegiality might seem ideal or a dream, but we can make it true if we want, and if we all begin at once and together. So I would like to conclude by reflecting together on this example that sparked advance and that attracted my attention. Thousands of teachers will retire, and with them will go all they have learned over the years, forever lost to the profession. And newcomers will arrive to spend their careers painfully learning what those who had just left had already figured out. So, finally, by being collegial, we create a culture in which we are willing to learn with, to learn from, and to teach our colleagues. Simply put, everyone can flourish in a collegial setting, and thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Professor Saida. Thank you. Really enjoyed your talk, because through this, you voiced some of the things that we rarely talk about, especially in terms of the psychology of teachers, in terms of what values we should nourish and flourish. And while waiting for our last speaker, just taking advantage of this, just to thank you for this presentation. Certainly about certain things that are generally not talked about. I know that we don't have this culture of transparency, of trust, mutual trust, and so on. Now, the last speaker will be, come from Lerback to Rabat, and Professor Nadia Halim will talk about teachers' perceptions, you see, attitudes, perceptions. I think we are still within the same issues. Teachers' perceptions of professional development needs, the case of the EFL University teachers in Morocco. Professor Nadia Halim teaches at the Hadith Hassani, which is an institute of higher education, and regardless of what might people's perceptions of the school, they are really updated as far as technology is concerned, because I know it, I've been there. So they are highly advanced, and they have developed a sense of collegiality you were talking about with the spirit. Probably they are more spiritually equipped than other teachers in other universities. The floor is yours. Okay, we'll be stopping in 10 minutes because, lunch is waiting. So,
all the colleagues and teachers who devoted some of their time to complete the questionnaire of this study. As you see, this presentation reports the results of a study on teachers' perceptions of professional development needs, the case of university teachers in Morocco. This is the outline. In my introduction, I would like just to emphasize that professional development is not only an ongoing process which aims at increasing the professional and personal growth of teachers, but more than this, it is a crucial element in the improvement of institutions and of education in general. One constant finding in the literature is that notable improvements in education almost never take place in the absence of professional development. However, professional development must be based on teachers' professional needs. In fact, teachers would be more active, more committed, more engaged in professional development if professional development programs are based on their actual needs. Unfortunately, to my knowledge, there are few studies within EFL teaching which concentrate on the basic and actual needs of teachers. And this is why I have chosen this issue. The main objectives of this study are, first, to address the issue of professional development in EFL teaching in the context of higher education, and second, to investigate the perceived needs of EFL university teachers in Morocco, and to come up with some findings that may hopefully benefit professional development designers in Morocco for EFL university teachers in specifying the basic areas of needs. I'm not going to discuss any theoretical issues. I know that most colleagues have discussed and will discuss this, but I go straight to the study. For the participants, 31 teachers were all practicing in higher education from 9 different higher education institutions, and 5 different cities were invited by email to contribute in the survey. Of those invited, 16 responded, resulting in 51.6 response rate. The instrument used here to collect data is a survey questionnaire, and the questionnaire consists of 2 sections. Section 1 was designed to collect information and about the general background of the participants, namely age and gender, years of teaching experience, and then the professional status. The second section was designed to provide information about the perceived needs. For the questions explored in this study, we have the following: level of interest in professional development, participation in professional development activities and their impact on teachers, factors that may prevent teachers from attending professional development activities, professional development needs, preferred professional development delivery formats, time and location, professional development resources to be available for teachers, and the last question, which was an open-ended question, was about the expected incentives teachers would like their institutions to provide for them. For the results, we have first the participants' characteristics. As you see here in this table, 69% were male, while 31% were female. The majority of teachers are either in the 40s or in the 50s, with 44 in both percent. For the teaching experience, most teachers worked between 6 and 10 years or more than 15 years. And for the professional status, we have here half of the participants have had the professional status of professeur d'enseignement supérieur assistant. And then we have also 31% of teachers had the status of professeur d'enseignement supérieur abilité, and 90% for professeur d'enseignement supérieur. Next, we have the main part of the study, which is the perceived needs. An an important question here is the degree of interest in professional development. Significantly important here is that the results were highly positive. 87.5% had strong interest, while only 12.5% had moderate interest. If we look at differences in the level of interest by age factor, we can see that 100% of people who were 49 and less displayed strong interest and showed strong interest. And for the differences of level of interest in terms of gender factor, we see that all females displayed strong interest, while males showed 82% of strong interest. For the attendance to professional development activities, teachers surprisingly showed only I think attendance of 5 days and less, and the attendance rate here is high, very high, 73.3, while only we have 6.6 for 16 or 20 days. The reasons that our respondents mentioned for not participating in professional development activities, there were no appropriate professional and suitable professional development opportunities. We have also lack of support from institutions. We have family responsibilities, and this is just mentioned by female respondents. And finally, professional development activities conflict with work schedule. If we move to the next question, which was about professional development activities and standards and their impact, here we have 6 items in the professional development activities. The participation rate, I'd like you just to have a look at the percentages involved. You can see that 75% attended conferences and seminars, and 56% attended courses and workshops, while 62.5% mentioned individual or collaborative research. Surprisingly, if we have a look at the impact mean, we can see that the activity which received the highest mean is individual or collaborative research, which means that university teachers are more interested in individual or collaborative research because they get effective impact from it. And then there is we have courses and workshops with a level or impact mean of 7.6, and then education conferences and seminars. The most important point here in this section is the perceived professional development needs. As you see in this table, we have the categories. Professional development needs are categorized into content and performance in main subjects, knowledge and understanding of instructional practices, assessment practices, classroom management, student counseling, higher education institutions management, student discipline, ICT skills, and personal management. What is important here is the level mean. We can see that the category which received the highest level mean is ICT skills, and disagrees with the findings of most teachers, especially the contribution of Dr. Bouziane. So it is the highest need in ICT skills, and all teachers recognize it. And then we have content and performance in main subject field, and then knowledge and understanding of instructional practices. Now surprisingly here, there is low need from teachers for student counseling, and then for classroom management, and for student discipline. It means teachers, university teachers, do not face difficulties in these areas. Okay, for the delivery formats, university teachers prefer professional networking and exchange programs and series of topic-related workshops, besides maybe lectures. If we move to the preferred time for professional development activities, the majority chose school calendar days. Only some respondents chose summer, and this tends to be associated with partnerships and exchange programs. for better professional development engagement, I have categorized the answers were coded and categorized into general items, which are allocating appropriate financial support, allowing for leave for professional development purposes, offering more professional development learning opportunities, and linking professional development to career advancement, setting up a body or center in charge of professional development, and finally providing more moral support. Now, if we look at the details of this question, we can see, I can quote some of the answers of the respondents. In category A, which received the highest rate, teachers suggested research sponsorship, help with some of the costs like travel expenses, provision of relevant resources, and maybe subscription to some periodicals, journals, etc. For the second item, allowing for leave for professional development purposes, we have released teachers on rotation basis so that they can go abroad and do some research and some time off during the training. And last, offering more professional development learning opportunities, like allowing for and encouraging international exchange programs and establishing partnerships. I move now to the conclusions and implications. On the basis of the results, of this study, we can draw the following implications and conclusions. First, there is an intrinsic motive for professional development among university teachers, and this is shown in the result of 87.5% strong interest. Second, results show considerable scarcity in professional development opportunities. We have 73% of teachers attended only 5 or less days, and hence there is a need for building and sustaining an institution culture for professional development. This was mentioned by Dr. Wakrim. So we need a culture in institutions for professional development, and especially those which are incentive-related ones. Third, it's high time for education executives to endorse a global perspective for professional development by providing and encouraging international exchange programs. And number 4, we have respondents qualified financial support as a key factor for any professional development endeavor to succeed, thus allowing for efficient financial support through equitable structures is of prime importance. And finally, we need research literature on this topic. Anyway, maybe we need further research, especially those which adopt multi-method approach. And then to conclude, I think university teachers are looking for better conditions to engage in professional development. And for me, I think for professional development to be successful and promising, we need perceived needs of teachers, but also perceived needs of students and also institutions. Thank you very much for
Thank you, Mr. Liam. I think for those who said that there is lack of research in this area, I think we have an answer this morning. We have 3 samples and 3 examples of research into this issue of professional development. In addition to this nice presentation of the culture and this. Unfortunately, we won't have time for questions or comments because, food is waiting, and then we have another session which will start in an hour. So, on your behalf, I would like to thank our 4 presenters this morning, and I would like to apologize to them because we are not going to give them this opportunity to interact with but what I suggest is that we can make up for this, but please be gentle on them because they need also some. Be gentle on them, and I think they deserve an applause before. And all that starts well ends well. We are starting with a very good thank you. So,
I would say most welcome. The ground is to Mustafa, who is going to talk to us about, thank you, teacher, but please let me work alone. Pragmatic awareness in FL, teacher education. The floor is yours. Mind you, 15 minutes, not more.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. But please let me speak more than 15 minutes. Thank you, teacher, but please let me work alone on pragmatic awareness in EFL teacher education. It's the title of this presentation. Actually, the development of pragmatic competence among non-native speakers of English, learners of English as a foreign language has become almost an axiom in the domain of applied linguistics, language learning and teaching enterprise in general. And this since the introduction of the concept of communicative competence by Himes in 1972, and in later versions or later models of communicative competence by Canale and Sway, 1983, Bachman, 1990, and Bachman and Palmer, 1994. Thank you, teacher, but please let me work alone is one section of an email that I received from a student of mine, which you are going to see in a minute. And for me, I mean, this section of the student email, which you are going to see, reflects a pragmatic deficiency. And in order for you to understand, I mean, this pragmatic deficiency, I will put you in the context of the email afterwards. But let me first, I will show you how I'm going to proceed in this presentation. I'm going to talk a little bit about the rationale behind the talk, and then I will lead you through some features of pragmatic knowledge, which also provide motivations for the topic of teacher pragmatic awareness. And then I will introduce, define teacher language awareness as it is presented in the model developed by Andrews. And then I will move to the focus of this presentation, teacher pragmatic awareness. Then I will present the key message behind this presentation. And then I will conclude with a sketchy outline for what I suggest to be a teacher pragmatic awareness course in teacher for EFL teacher education. Well, let's go straight forward to the email I talked to you about, which presents the first motivation behind this presentation. It is almost evident now among language teachers and also applied linguistic practitioners that EFL learners' pragmatic deficiencies require us, I mean, to pay attention to the development of their pragmatic competence, which is part and parcel of communicative competence. One such pragmatic deficiencies can be illustrated by this email, as you can see. Thank you, teacher, but please let me work alone, because each time I work with Najat, there is procrastination, and this outline is mine. I mean, it is me who did it. Thanks in advance. This is an email which I received from a student working under my supervision towards the completion of their BA end of term paper. In order for you to understand this email and its significance and the pragmatic deficiency it incorporates, I have to put you in its context. In Agadir, one of the most populated universities in Morocco, and more particularly the Department of English, I mean, it's very, very populated. So teachers, they end up with huge groups to supervise in semester 6. And in order to cut the number, I personally have 30 papers or 30 students to supervise. And actually these 2 days, Agadir is holding a conference on the use of ICT to teach overcrowded classes, the 7th and the 8th of May, which means that the problem is a very big problem in that university, in that faculty. Well, in order to reduce the number of students I have to supervise to the half, I choose to pay students to let them work jointly on a single paper. So I mean, if I have 30, I will end up with 15. And for a student to work individually on a research paper is considered to be a luxury that students have not enjoyed for a long time now in our department. Because it involves much of an imposition on the teacher. If you allow one student to work individually on his research paper, then the other students will also require the same thing. It happens that some students do not get along well with each other working on the same paper, so they decide to work individually, each on his own or her own paper. So to ask a teacher to let you work individually on your paper is much of an imposition, and it turns out to be a tall order even. Okay, so I mean, this student, as you can see, I mean, sent me an email because she doesn't get along very well with her partner, and she decides to work. I mean, she says that she developed the outline herself, and also she did everything maybe by herself. Now, if we concentrate on the text of the email, we see that the student wants, and she is being polite to her teacher, supervisor. All right, the proof is that she starts her email with the thank you expression, and she ends her email with the thank you expression, which means that she ends, and she actually is linguistically polite. But when she goes to the second section of the email, but please let me work alone, she uses the imperative, let me work alone. So it's as if, I mean, you're sticking to her and she just wants you to leave her alone. She uses the imperative to perform a request. And actually, I don't know whether it is a request or a plea or a complaint. I'm confused, okay? If it were a request, then the student is not applying the pragmalinguistic and socio-pragmatic norms which govern request performance in English. We know that the English language has got a whole inventory of indirect request strategies which are made available to its native speakers, as well as, I mean, to its non-native speakers, to perform the request taking into consideration the contextual variables of power, social distance, the size of the imposition, and so on. Given, I mean, this context, I mean, the student, I don't know her personally. I met her just one time in an initiating seminar, right? And then, I mean, she sent me the email, which means that the distance is a little bit high, okay? And also, I mean, I'm her teacher, and I'm her supervisor, okay? So, which means that the power relationship is there, okay? I'm more powerful than her in the contextual situation of the university. Third, I mean, the size of the imposition, what she is asking me to do, is much of an imposition. Because, I mean, if we allow students to work individually, then I will end up with 30 papers to supervise instead of just 15. So, I mean, plus distance, plus power, and also the size of the imposition is high, which, according to the pragmatic norms of English, she should use an indirect strategy instead of a direct or the most direct strategy. Let me. Okay, she could have said, for example, can you, would you, is it possible? I wonder if it would be possible. I wonder if it's possible, and so on. So a whole inventory of strategies that are there. Right. Of course, I mean, the student, she explains the reasons and so on, but this is not that important. The second motivation behind this presentation is the emergence of pragmatic awareness in students after taking a course in pragmatics. According to my own experience with my master's students here present, I mean, when we finish a class on pragmatics, I mean, they just come to me and they tell me about their anecdotes and how the course has impacted them in, they started producing comments on each other's conversational contributions. They started commenting on each other's conversational contributions in terms of directness, indirectness, in terms of politeness, using notions like trace and so on. We're going to talk about this later. So this pragmatic awareness is, manifested through students' engagement in the pragmatic analysis of each other's conversational contributions. And also some students, they ask me whether there are certain professional development opportunities in pragmatic, right? With research groups, workshops, and so on, which they seek to join in order to deepen their knowledge in pragmatic awareness. Now I will lead you, this means, that having knowledge about pragmatic knowledge is not sufficient. What the students themselves feel is that in order for them to be good teachers, to use this knowledge effectively in the language teaching classroom, they have, to sort of make it ready for use, to have it ready for use, to help their students develop their pragmatic competence. Now let me lead you through certain pragmatic features which are of immediate importance to teacher pragmatic awareness. And these features are empirically established. Inward pragmatic knowledge is mostly held unconsciously. We have got pragmatic knowledge in our mind, parts and parcel of our communicative knowledge, but it is unconscious and not conscious. Much of inward pragmatic knowledge is acquired through the process of instruction in our childhood. C'est quoi le mot magique? Okay? When a student in French society fails to perform the act of thinking, then c'est quoi le mot magique? It's a direct way to elicit a thinking expression from him. There are pragmatic universals. So there are pragmatic principles which are common to all languages and cultures. Pragmatic knowledge is conventional. It's conventional in the sense that every cultural group has got its own pragmatic system on which they draw when they operate in their own language. Pragmatic knowledge varies across languages and cultures, so it's culture specific. It might be. Despite universals, pragmatic knowledge can be culture specific. Next, learners at different proficiency levels display pragmatic deficiencies. Even advanced foreign language learners, they suffer from pragmatic deficiencies in their performance. Learners' pragmatic deficiencies are the result of pragmatic transfer, overgeneralization, teaching practices, and resistance. Students, can ignore those pragmatic norms specific to the A2, as also they can resist it. They can choose not to adhere to those norms out of cultural identity, subjectivity, or naming. Then pragmatic knowledge is closely related to the language user's attitudes toward interpersonal relationship. When you fail to perform or to observe a certain pragmatic norm of the language you speak, people will tie it and relate it to yourself as a personality, as an education, and not to the fact that you are not proficient. Okay? Pragmatic deficiencies are less acceptable to native speakers than grammatical deficiencies. You can commit any grammatical error, the native speaker will be tolerant of that. But if you commit a pragmatic error, this is not tolerated. Okay? Pragmatic failure is very often seen as personal failure. Okay? And pragmatic failure is likely to lead to negative impression formation and cross-cultural stereotypes. Pragmatic features are not salient. Unlike grammar and phonology, pragmatic features of a language, they are not salient. Therefore, explicit instruction is thought to be beneficial in alleviating learners' A2 pragmatic deficiencies. Knowledge about A2 pragmatics is not a guarantee for its effective use in performance. That is, to have knowledge, like to have knowledge of grammar. Students have got knowledge of grammar sometimes, a grammatical rule, but they fail to respect it in their performance. Likewise, in pragmatics, you may have a certain pragmatic norm, but you may fail to perform it in your language performance. Now again, teacher language, how does this relate to teacher language education? In general, teacher pragmatic awareness is part and parcel of teacher language awareness, given that pragmatic knowledge is a crucial component of language knowledge. So Andrews thinks that the language teachers, to be professional, they need to have adequate knowledge of the language, the first thing. They need to master the language they will be teaching, pedagogical content knowledge, and they have to have adequate knowledge about the language. And it's here where language awareness interferes. Okay, language knowledge about the language, which is metacognitive in nature. And they need to have, in addition to this, ability to make effective use of these two types of knowledge in pedagogical practice. What's pragmatic? Teacher pragmatic awareness. Okay, teacher pragmatic awareness encompasses three competencies. Of course, first, they need a teacher to be pragmatically aware, needs to be pragmatically competent first, as a language user. Second, competence, he needs to have, or she also needs to have, competence as a language pragmatist analyst. And here, pragmatic awareness comes into being. That is, the teacher needs to be able to analyze language pragmatically. And also, he needs to have ability to make effective use of knowledge of, which is language use, and knowledge about, which is awareness, pragmatics as language teacher. The key message, therefore, I want to argue for here, is that a pragmatic awareness course in EFL teacher education is indispensable and needs to cater for teacher trainees' awareness along two dimensions. The first dimension is labeled declarative dimension, and the second is procedural dimension. This distinction between declarative and procedural knowledge is very famous in cognitive psychology, and it was borrowed, to account for pragmatic knowledge, for pragmatic awareness as well. So, for the declarative dimension, it is needed to equip teacher trainees with knowledge about language pragmatics. Knowledge about language, and it's different from knowledge of, which is procedural. Knowledge about language pragmatics, which will provide for the content of their teaching activities, and procedural dimension to equip teacher trainees with the pedagogical procedures to put knowledge about language pragmatics to effective use in the foreign language classroom. Just a couple of minutes, and I'll be done. So for the declarative, I do suggest a sketchy outline for what a teacher pragmatic awareness course will look like, which caters for both dimensions. For the declarative dimension, teacher trainees need to know about universal pragmatic features and principles. They need to know about speech act, and that the notion of speech act is universal, in that it exists in all languages and cultures. They need to know about cooperation in communication and how it is manifested pragmatically, drawing on Grass's theory of the cooperative principle. They need to know politeness theory and how politeness gets visualized in language use and language teaching and learning. Such a course needs also to draw on insights from cross-cultural pragmatics, where teacher needs to know about culture-specific pragmatic features.
Shall I declare the end?
Okay.
Time is over.
I will summarize in 1 minute. Okay.
It is simply because it's too insightful that I can't.
Okay, fine. So I will just say, okay, in 1 minute, that this teacher pragmatic awareness course needs to account for two types of knowledge. Declarative knowledge, which means knowledge about language pragmatics, and procedural knowledge, which is knowledge of how to put this knowledge about pragmatics into effective use in the foreign language classroom. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We'll move on to reflections on the teaching of pragmatics in the EFL classroom. Implications for teacher training and textbook design, presented by Dr. Hisham Latif. And this time it's not from Agadir, but from the International Institute for Higher Education in Morocco, Rabat. The floor is yours, and I would not say it. not from a usage, you know, as a teacher.
Today I'm going to talk to you about the place of pragmatics in the EFL classroom, implications for textbook design and teacher training. I would more focus on textbook design than on teacher training, given the time constraints of the presentation, and I hope we can make it in 15 minutes. I would like to thank Dr. Talay for paving the way for me, because he spared me the time to make the theoretical introductions to this paper. In my paper, in my presentation, I will mainly be focusing on the TEFL pedagogical guidelines, which I would be comparing to the textbook reality. In fact, I will be looking closely at the place of pragmatics in these pedagogical guidelines, and I will try to pin down some of the mismatches that exist between what the pedagogical guidelines promise and the reality of textbooks in Morocco. I will try to compare the use of, I will take one specific function, namely requests, since I worked on this as part of my previous research, and we'll take the examples of two textbooks and see how the speech act of requesting is presented and taught in these two textbooks. And then I will hopefully end with some implications and some reflections on the challenges of teacher training in the field of pragmatics. Well, as stipulated in the pedagogical guidelines, the goal of English language teaching in Morocco is that students in Morocco must communicate in a culturally appropriate manner with people from around the world. Our students must be aware of different perspectives reflected in both the language and behaviors of other people. They must possess language skills and an understanding of other cultures to be productive members of the diverse communities in which we all live. I would like you to note down here the idea of culturally appropriate manner, which is, in my view, how the pedagogical guidelines refer to pragmatic competence. And I read the guidelines, and I couldn't find where the word pragmatic competence, is mentioned, but it's the way they refer to it as culturally appropriate with people from around the world. The learners and the development of their communicative competence are at the very core of the teaching program objectives. Of course, the methodology which is adopted is competency-based language teaching, which relies on what the learner can do with the language, not what the learner knows only about the language. And pragmatics are mainly included in the guidelines under functions, which include mainly speech acts like, which include functions like greeting people, giving, eliciting information, describing daily activities, and asking for permission, requesting, offering help, and so on and so forth. Now, the place of pragmatics, according to the guidelines, is an important one. And as stipulated in the guidelines, communication or communicative function should receive tremendous importance in the teaching continuum. Teaching of everyday, real-world language. I would like you to remember that everyday, real-world language used in a variety of sociocultural situations in which features of language elements and culture are selected and graded according to their priority in actual communication. Of course, the guidelines also suggest that this should be done to realistic tasks and which imitate real life conditions. And the speaker-writer must have a real purpose for what he's talking or writing about. In addition to that, the learner must be placed in situations where he must use the language as an instrument for meeting or satisfying immediate needs, immediate communicative needs, and where the criterion for success is functional effectiveness, appropriateness, rather than structural or formal accuracy. I will not continue on citing these principles because I'm running out of time. I will directly move to the textbooks. I picked two textbooks to see whether the above-mentioned principles are respected. Because after all, if you can be a very good teacher, but if you don't have also a good book, or if the book you are using is so limited, it's very hard to do your job. The first book I'm working on here is Ticket to English. The first thing I noted down in this textbook is that the functions are covered only in one page. One page for functions. In every unit there is only one page, sometimes half a page. That gives us an idea about the importance granted to pragmatics in general or to functions in particular, although we claim that we are targeting communicative competence in everyday language and appropriateness rather than correctness. In the whole book, there is one page that says dealing with requests under the heading asking for clarifications and do me a favor. In asking for clarifications, the students are provided with some expressions taken from a previous listening, and they were asked to classify them in a table. The problem is that all the expressions to be classified show lack of understanding, and there is nothing to classify actually. There is no further classification according to directness, or formality, or politeness. The dialogue is a conversation between Sandy and George. Okay? The dialogue is a conversation between Sandy and George, but we are not given any contextual clues on the relationship between the interlocutors. There is no picture to help the learner imagine the context. Therefore, the gap-filling exercise turns more into a grammar exercise rather than a communicative activity where students should be sensitive to the context and rather worry about being appropriate than being correct. The second activity, which is do me a favor, please. I would like you to have a look at this short dialogue between woman and boy. Your music is disturbing the other passengers. Would you mind reducing the volume? Boy, yes, sure. I wasn't aware it was too loud. Can you tell me, is it a favor? To me, I think here, first, the request in this situation is not about a favor. It's rather about a right. The pre-request, modifying the head request, would you mind reducing the volume, is more like a complaint here, backing the right of the speaker to make such a request. Second, apart from the word passengers, the context does not give enough clues to who is speaking. We have woman and boy. The students cannot imagine the context. Instead, they will be focusing only on using the so polite, conventionally indirect forms, would you mind? And yet, sure. All this could affect the way the request is formulated. We don't know if the woman is another passenger, or the driver, or if the boy is her son, or another passenger. So we don't know whether they are familiar, what is the power relationship between the two interlocutors. We don't know whether they are on a plane, whether they are on a bus. We have no clue to the context. And we are supposed to use a good, an appropriate requesting expression. I think it's simply impossible for students to figure out the right expression without giving them enough clues to the context. The exercises that follow simply ask the students to match the right exchange with the right function and fill a table with more request expressions. The students are then given some situations and asked to make requests. The whole exercise, the focus was on recognition, recognizing the function from the form and producing the form in similar situations. However, how the context affects the form, how the request should be presented in an exchange, turn-taking and conversation building, is not dealt with in the textbook. All in all, the contextual clues in the materials presented in this textbook to teach requests are poor, and request forms are dealt with as a pile of forms that could be used interchangeably regardless of context. So, concerning the other textbook, which is Al-Masar textbook for tronc commun level. Requests are dealt only in 2 units of the book. Okay, requests are dealt only in 2 units of this book, and one about asking for permission and giving permission, and the other one is about polite requests. Concerning asking permission and giving permission, only can I and may I were presented as 2 expressions that we can use for giving permission. And by the way, the difference between the 2 expressions is ignored by the textbook. In terms of formality, we all know that there is a difference between can I and may I. There is no context for the 2 expressions. The students are not provided with any dialogue. The learners are immediately asked to practice the 2 expressions like a grammatical item. On the other hand, the students in Unit 9 are taught how to use polite requests. I want you to have a look at this dialogue on the screen. Beth, can I use your computer? Hamid, I am afraid you can't. This exchange...
I'm afraid I'm going to stop you.
Can I take 2 more minutes, please?
Yes.
This exchange is supposed to teach students how to make polite requests and respond politely to a request. However, ironically enough, if the first turn in the exchange is close to being impolite, the second turn is clearly impolite. Even if we suppose that Beth and Hamid are close friends, which we do not know, one cannot ask a friend for a personal computer without modifying the request with any softeners or grounders. The same could be said of the reply to the request. It technically uses the polite form, I'm afraid you can't, but falls short of being polite because the reply is not justified to save the face of the speaker. Politeness is a matter of face, not so-called polite or formal forms. If the latter are not used appropriately in context, they serve the opposite purpose. Okay, compare the above-mentioned exchange to these examples by American native speakers. In the same situation, Americans use these expressions. This is from data I collected before. Can I just use your computer for a sec? I need to check my email. Hey, sorry, I really need to check my email. It'll only take a minute. Could I please use your computer? Sorry, I know you're busy. Hey, can I ask a favor? I'm expecting an email and just need to check my email like for 2 minutes. Compare the richness of the expressions and the combination of expressions with softeners, with grounders, with politeness expressions, with alerters like hey. In order to produce a balance between all these elements to produce a polite and appropriate request, which is not a matter of, and I end up with this, please. Can you show me your photo album, please? Sure, here it is. And can you do the shopping for me, please? I'm afraid I can't. I'm very busy. Here we have a socio-pragmatic problem. Not a pragmalinguistic problem. Here, first, the relationship between A and B. I want you to pay attention. The interlocutors are referred to by A and B. We don't know who they are. The learner does not have any clues to the power relationship or social distance. Knowing the information determines the way the request will be formulated and planned. Second, the situations themselves seem to be quite unusual in an American context. The photo album is very confusing. We do not know which album the example is talking about. A personal photo album, for example, is considered a very intimate object that cannot simply be given to people after a short, abrupt request like the one above. In addition, in example 2, and I end up with this, in addition, in example 2 above, similarly offers very few contextual clues. Once more, the nature of the relationship between the interlocutors is not...
Well, thank you very, very much indeed. I think the message has been delivered. We leave it to the discussion. Thank you very much indeed. Now, this is one of the positive aspects of such sort of colloquium. I've learned a great deal. I'm learning as a teacher how to teach pragmatics myself. Thank you very much, Mr. Latif. I'm sorry, time constraints. It's a chariot, I told you. Please go and read Juhis Schoolmistress to know about the notion of time. The next is from Ujda. Is that right? Am I right? Yes. And that's, a decade ago, we heard about the death of the author. Today, this afternoon, we are going to listen to Abdelaziz Askito, who is going to talk about the death of method in EFL education, a critical perspective. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much.
And I'm going to... Okay?
Just before setting out to expand on the issue formulated in the title above, I deemed it necessary, if not prudent, to bring into light 2 very points at the very beginning of this presentation. The first point is that the term method will be used in 3 variations throughout this presentation. I will be using the term method to refer to the methods listed by Lassen-Freeman, 1986, and Richards and Rogers, 1986. I mean, there are 2 books published in the mid-80s have long occupied the top 2 ranks among the books prescribed for methods, language education in general, and English language teaching in particular. So therefore, I will refer to all those methods. I mean, by method, I mean competency-based language teaching, audio-lingual method, direct method, all those methods listed by those authors. I will refer to them as methods, although they are nowadays considered as approaches to language teaching. The second point is that there is perhaps one main reason behind taking this daunting task, and it can be dated with precision to an incident which was repeated 4 times since I joined the teaching profession and became a teacher. I do still remember that in the school year 2007, 2008, 2009, and 2010, I received 4 circulars from the Ministry of Education to attend pedagogical meetings, and all these pedagogical meetings were devoted to helping teachers of English, this method, these meetings were devoted to enlightening and helping teachers of English get acquainted with the methods the Ministry of Education wanted to implement. And in every meeting, the Ministry of Education, helped by EFL supervisors and American experts from the RILO and the British Council, they did their best to explain the underlying set of principles and characteristics of the methods the Ministry of Education wanted to implement. In fact, we talked and were asked to implement the pedagogy by objectives, then some communicative language teaching approaches, task-based language teaching, cooperative learning, competency-based language teaching, standard-based movement, which is an important component of competency-based language teaching. And it seems that we are now expecting more and more circulars from the Ministry of Education to attend pedagogical meetings on language methods. And therefore, I can safely predict that whenever a new method appears there in Center Applied Linguistics circles, we are the first ones to apply it in our teaching context. So the purpose behind this presentation is to try to provide a critical perspective on the issue of language methods, especially in contexts where English is taught as a foreign language. The Moroccan context is a case here as an example. So I will try to call for a radical change in our conceptualizations of language methods, and also I will highlight the overuse and the overvalue and the overemphasis that has been always given to language methods in EFL education. Therefore, I will call for the death of method. I will just say that English language teaching have arrived at a point of death. Let me just now go back to the title, The Death of Method in EFL education. I think that this title may provoke its readers and can lead them to ask perhaps two interrelated questions. The first question is that, what does the presenter mean by using the word death in the formulated title? The second point is, have English language teaching methods really arrived at a point of death? In order to answer the first question, let me just make it clear from the very beginning that the use of the term death is not a personal choice, by the way. If you go back to the literature, and especially on language teaching methods, you will find that there are some researchers who used this term before. And I would like, just due to time constraints, I will just refer to two researchers. The first one is Dick Allwright, who used the term, seemed to use the term death of method quite often in an article titled The Death of Method. The Death of the Method, yes. And he talked about that, and he was just emphasizing the fact that methods are relatively unhelpful to language teaching. And there are also another researcher, well-known one, Douglas Brown, who also seemed to use this imagery of that more again and again in his research, and he has sought to lay to rest the concept of method and sing a requiem for recently introed methods. Also, Rutland Cameron in their volume on language teaching and globalization also used this word, the demise of method in language education. There are other researchers, mainly researchers interested in critical applied linguistics, and I would like to mention just some people who also proved this imagery of that. I would mention Noonan Kanagaraja and Kumara Valivol. Computer electric, I'm sorry. The English language teaching has known some major changes in terms of approaches and methods. And perhaps one distinguished feature is that the field has been in constant change and movement. And this change, on the one hand, stems from dissatisfaction with traditional methods that used, as Sibousian said this morning, used chalk, talk, and the textbook. And on the other hand, it came as a result of the growing advances in the development and the adoption of new methods which emerged in order to meet the learner's needs across various contexts. So the solution to English language teaching was seen in the adoption of new methods, which resulted for the search of the best method that can be applicable and generalizable across various contexts. And then just would like to mention Stern, who maintained that language educators sought to solve the problems of language teaching by focusing attention almost exclusively on method. Richards also maintained that the notion of teaching methods has had a long history in language teaching, as is witnessed by the rise and fall of a variety of methods throughout the recent history of language teaching. The question now is what a method is and what makes it distinguished or different from other terms. It seems that the term method has been used so much and so often that we hardly make a pause to think about its meaning. It's on the lips of just about anyone attending a language conference around the world, and it appears in many books, articles, journals on English language teaching, and is increasingly becoming part of the discourse of language teaching. So this was said by Mackay. He said something about that, which is very interesting. He lamented that the word method means so little and so much. The reason for this is not hard to find. It lies in the state and organization of our knowledge of language and language learning. It lies in willful ignorance of what has been done and said and taught in the past. It lies in the vested interests which methods become, and it lies in the meaning of method. I mean, people who are interested in English language teaching usually refer to Anthony, who was perhaps the first article to draw a certain distinction between method, approach, and technique. And I think that his hierarchical framework persisted for a long time. I assume that people didn't know about that and about the difference between that. So maybe I'll just the distinction between approach, method, and technique. I just want to mention that Anthony's model was also criticized, and was criticized by some researchers who expressed deep dissatisfaction with his framework in the sense that it was hierarchical, and also in the sense that the term method and approach are still used interchangeably and in free variations in ERT research. But what I should stress here is that when we talk about method, if you go back to many definitions on methods by Brown, also by Richards, and last and Freeman, you will find that when we talk about method, and this is very important by the way, when we talk about method, we don't refer to what teachers actually do in the classroom, but rather we refer to those established methods constructed and conceptualized by experts in the field. And this will lead me to talk about the first limitation of method. The first limitation is that methods are typically top-down impositions of experts' views of teaching. That is to say that the role of the teacher is minimized within the confines of the method, and the role of the teacher is to apply the teaching method and adapt his teaching style or her teaching style to make it conform to the method. Hence, they are prescriptive. The second limitation is that methods are based on idealized concepts geared towards idealized contexts. And this is one of the limitations of English language behind English language teaching methods. You know, I mean, the methods do not this limitation just point to the fact that methods usually fail to address the broader context of language teaching and language learning, because there are many other factors which are very important in the teaching learning process. Another point to be mentioned here is that when we talk about these methods, we are talking about methods that appear even before teaching context is identified. The third one is that there is considerable overlap in their theoretical as well as practical approaches to language teaching and learning. So the fact that there have been several methods to language teaching may indicate that every method has a specified set of practices and principles, but this is not true. Research has shown that they overlap. Verba said something very interesting. I like what she said here. She said that what appears to be a radically new method is more often than not a variant of existing methods presented with a fresh paint and new terminology that camouflages their fundamental similarity. The fourth limitation is that, yes, of course, when we talk about methods that are too limited and too inadequate to satisfactorily explain the complexities of language teaching. As I said, there are many factors that need to be taken into consideration when we talk about a particular teaching context. These factors are mainly cognitive, economic, cultural, political, institutional, and also ideological, by the way. And this led Kumar Abadivolo, when we talk about the myth of the method, he said that all those methods listed by Lassus and Rutgers have been maintained and have been maintained by multiple myths that have been accepted for a long time as articles of faith. And the first myth about language method is that there's always a best method out there, ready and waiting to be discovered. Stern said that the language teaching operation went on expeditions after expeditions searching for the best method, and there was a kind of obsession with methods. The fact is that there is no best method, and there will never be the best method. There is one article by Provo who talked about that. The title of his article, which was published in Tiesol Quarterly. Yes, there is no best method. Yes, there is no best method. Thank you. The second myth is that method constitutes the organizing principle for language teaching. That's not right. There are so many factors. One fact about that is there are so many factors that need to be taken into consideration, and these factors are mainly factors related to teacher definition, economic imperative, institutional constraints, cultural context, political exigencies. All of these factors are inextricably linked together. The third myth that persisted in our field of English language teaching, that method has a universal and ahistorical value. Ahistorical means it was not bound by time. And we know, our professors this morning say that learners learn English for different purposes. They have different purposes, different needs, and they learn English for different purposes and different needs. And the fact that those methods are idealized or are geared towards idealized concepts means that they do not address the real or the local exigencies of the particular teaching context. The fourth myth is that theorists conceive knowledge and teachers consume knowledge. And this has to do with, as I said, when I talked about methods, I told you that methods are those established methods conceptualized and constructed by theorists. So the teachers were asked to implement these methods in their teaching context. And all these methods were established and conceptualized by experts, and they are far from the reality of the classroom. The fifth myth is that method is neutral and has no ideological motivation. That is a myth that persisted in our language teaching, and I think that there are so many researchers that I mentioned. Perhaps the prominent one is Robert Phillipson, linguistic imperialism, talked about that, and he said that these practices, especially center-based practices, center-based methods, are laden with ideological agendas that aim to maintain unequal division of power and resources, where the center applied linguistic circles produce knowledge, and the periphery are asked to consume these methods. This realization had led to the fact that the term method is a label without substance. Pennycock said that methods diminish rather than enhance our understanding of language teaching, and the others went perhaps beyond that when he said that language teaching might be better and better executed if the concept of method were not to exist at all. And this realization also has resulted in a widespread dissatisfaction and strong sentiment and strong discontent with the widespread acceptance of methods. So what is needed then? What do we need then? In my paper, I have tried to call for a context-sensitive pedagogy informed by 3 parameters. So these parameters are mainly parameters of particularity, practicality, and possibility. Kumar Abadivolo talked about a post-method pedagogy, but I don't want to use that post-method pedagogy. I seem to prefer the word context-based pedagogy, and I'm going to focus on that. These are very important. For the context-based pedagogy, I think that it has to take into consideration the first parameter, which is very important, the parameter of particularity, because they say that
method helps organize time. 1 minute. 1 minute.
Okay. Okay, but just what I want to say is that all teaching contexts, for a language pedagogy to take place, it must be sensitive to a particular group of learners, teaching a particular group of, it must be sensitive to a particular group of teachers, teaching a particular group of learners, pursuing a particular set of goals with a particular institutional context embedded in a particular socio-cultural milieu. That is to say that there should be a paradigm shift that has to take place from laboratory-oriented research to classroom-oriented research that is more sensitive to the local exigencies of a particular teaching context. So practicality simply refers to the fact that teachers need to theorize from their practice and practice what they theorize, and possibility refers to what Professor Afkish said this morning. We talked about Paulo Freire, pedagogy of rest, because I mean this has to do with what he said in his theorization. So it refers to the social, cultural, political, economic, technological, and other factors. Will mention some micro strategies which are neutral and which are based on cluster-oriented research.
Would you just scapegoats?
I will move to the conclusion.
Well, thank you. You should thank. You should thank or I thank in your place. Just thank. No, I would be penalized. I would be penalized.
Just one last thing. Just one last thing. There's a nice verse. There's a nice verse from a poet. Yes, I will stop right now. There is a nice poem written by a nice poet. It goes something like that in Spanish. Caminante no hay camino, se hace el camino y andar. It simply means in English, traveler, there are no roads. The road is created as we walk it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, this reminds me of, I speak too much literature because I'm a man of letters, so I'm not a linguist. This reminds me of Hamlet. You know Hamlet? Hamlet, at a certain point in the play, he feigns insanity, he feigns madness. And he said, even in madness, there is method. Okay, thank you very much. The next. Now, don't worry. Everything, every hardship, every work you present is rewarded. Okay, so nothing is negative. Everything is positive since there is reward, and it is to my colleague, Dr. Abdelaziz Qasbi, who is going to talk about from reflective teaching to effective and rewarding professional development. So back to life from that. Thank you. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm very happy to be here in the university where I have taught in the 80s, a long time. But at the same time, I'm very intimidated because I'm in front of many of my teachers, Mr. Wakri, Mr. Diouni. So I don't think that I will survive the discussion session, I hope. So the outline is, so we talk about reflective teaching, the goals of reflective teaching and strategies of reflective teaching. So reflective teaching is an acquired critical reflection. It is something that we learn. We are not born people who can reflect on their teaching. It includes self-awareness, knowing what you're doing first. Self-observation, having the capacity to observe oneself, and self-evaluation. So then in the evaluation you try to scrutinize according to the set of objectives. In the planning process, of course, you have some goals, and then when you do self-observation, you try to see whether the goals you have assigned to yourself, you have met them. And then reacting positively, and here it's very important the word positively, not in a negative way, to weaknesses, to both weaknesses and strength, and I will explain why. This will lead to professional development. Now, there was a significant development in reflective practice, and here I'd like to make a difference between reflecting in action and on action. And I like the analogy which was made by a researcher when he drew a comparison between taking photos with the old camera, remember the old cameras, the films, and the new digital camera. It makes a big difference. Now imagine you are in a marriage, in your marriage ceremony, you give your friend your old camera, traditional camera, and you say take photos, and you cross your fingers, hoping that the photos after will be good. And then after developing the film, you realize that your best friend has forgotten his finger in front of the lenses. It's impossible to repeat the marriage. Possible? No, it's not possible. Now, with the digital camera, it's different. So while I'm taking photos, I can check and see if Larousse is okay. I can keep it. If not, I delete. That's the main difference. Now here, we'd like to see at least four processes in development of reflective practice. First one is reflecting for teaching. That includes planning before even going to the classroom. There is planning, and here the teacher's role is to predict. Okay? Maybe to predict even the difficulties that his students may face. Alright? Then you have reflecting in teaching, while teaching. This is done by most of teachers. Sometimes it is done unconsciously, consciously while teaching. A professional teacher does not need to tell his students, do you understand? All he has to do is to look at their eyes, and he knows that he has then to improvise, maybe to reword what he has said before. And then we have reflecting on teaching, after teaching. And here, for example, when you finish a course, then you think about it and you see how you can make things better next time. And then the last thing is reflecting with teaching. Here you have to identify your skills, your abilities, your capacities, and to improve alone and with others. And that's something we don't see much in our universities. I was lucky to have taught in secondary school before being a university teacher, and I have learned this technique of observing and being observed. We lack it a lot in universities. Now, extension in reflective teaching. Now, before there was a focus on weaknesses in the past. Teacher used to focus when reflecting, they reflect on the thing that goes wrong. And now the development is that we should instead, not all the time, sometimes focus also on our strength. Why? Simply because if you focus just on your problems, you will end up with a depression, and you will end up, you will die young. And likely to survive for your students and for your children. So then we should question, appreciate our success. So if you are positive, you grow in this direction. And all the time I tell my students, don't be too negative. Focus on the positive side of your life. Otherwise, it will be very difficult for you to survive. All right? Then, so we have to start with a description of the teaching process, whether it's negative or positive. Then we have to interpret that description, identify the reason why I'm teaching this way, and then remedies if think there are things to be changed, or reinforcing if the things there are positive things in my teaching strategies. So why do we need reflective teaching? We need it at least first to have a deep understanding of the teaching process. And then for personal reasons for teaching this, why am I teaching this way? For personal reasons, you have to ask yourself all the time. For professional reasons, to reach self-actualization or self-esteem among other teachers. And we know within an institution, teachers who are good teachers, it is known by everybody, including students and administration. And also pedagogical reasons to try to leave a trace. It's like you remember a teacher that has taught you for many years and say, I remember this. It was taught to me by this teacher, and that makes that means that the teacher has left a trace in you. So we have to evaluate better our teaching performance. That leads to reflection, and when you can reflect, you can gain self-confidence, and when you are self-confident, you can try and evaluate different options. So requirements, what is needed to be for reflective teaching? So reflection of the teaching process. So of course we say it can be, I call it an a priori and a posteriori analysis of the teaching process. It can be before, it's like the in-on action as I have just mentioned, and then of course the response after, and then it can be done also through peer observation. This is not, as I said, done in universities. You should be ready to observe and be observed, which is not the case all the time. We hesitate, especially when we think that we are experienced. We don't like others to analyze our way of teaching, which is a sign of arrogance sometimes. So an arrogant teacher cannot be a reflective teacher, and a Mr. Know-all teacher cannot be a reflective teacher. So we need to have the willingness to improve. We need to be open-minded. We need to be ready for change. Human beings resist change generally. We like to do things that we used to do many years ago. And I remember when I was a novice as a new teacher, I contacted an experienced teacher, told him to tell me what he used to teach, and he was very happy to help me, and he handed to me his planning, his lesson planning. It was a white paper which turned to be yellow because it dates back to 20 years ago. Now, I understood that he will not learn much from this teacher because it was the lesson that he has used for 20 years. It means that he's not a reflective teacher. So, we need to prepare things. Pre-observation, so the two teachers should sit together to agree on the things that we will observe. Then the observation where we have to collect information. Then the post-observation we will have discussion. And it can be also, the teacher can self-observe himself when he can write those self-reports. And we can have also students' feedback, which are interesting. How many of us teachers, for example, ask students what they think of our way of teaching? Because sometimes we're afraid to receive some negative remarks. As a conclusion, see, I'm respecting time. Professional. So, reflective teaching is a must. It gives quality of teaching. Experience is not enough, okay? Reflection empowers teachers to improve their teaching style. Experience plus reflection leads to professional development. Thank you for your attention.
Well, thank you very much. This leads me to say convincingly that there has been method. Because method helps you, manage time. Thank you very much indeed. Very, very much indeed. And I did not do like the others who were too strict, too harsh on their equipe. I was too lenient with my equipe. But he helped me, just gave me my minutes back. Thank you very much. I think. Yeah, no, fine, thank you, I love it. I think I was told, who told me, I don't know. There is always this 10 minutes if you have any questions. And this time I'm going to interfere, sorry, I'm going to do it. I would love it if the questions come from students. Say. And what? And what? I did as my, experts did. I take 5. And what? And the last thing, let me check. Okay, well, you can go for when we have enough. Mr. Look, because you gave me the ground. And when the last but not the least, this. Comment from again.
Mr. Olas, my question is directed to Mr. Clay and Mr. Latif. So on the basis of what you have presented, sir, concerning pragmatic knowledge and cultural awareness, where can we state and classify the contribution of pragmatic knowledge in professional development and reflective teaching for the teacher and the student? The second question is, can we talk about professional development and reflexive teaching without being aware of pragmatic knowledge? Thank you so much.
I'm an ELT supervisor. I've been in the profession for something like 19 years. I'm afraid what he said about imposing methods from the Ministry of Education, this has ended, and the death of method has been acknowledged in Morocco since beginning of 2000, okay, something like 2001 and 2. So what we are talking about in our own context is what we call the kind of an eclectic kind of teacher with more creativity. He confused also approaches and methods. Content-based instruction, competency-based instruction, lexical approach. These are all approaches, not methods. And I think teachers, okay, I think teachers need to be aware of different methods, to be aware of those methods, and develop their own method. You don't teach from scratch, I'm afraid. My reaction to the my question is going to be to last speaker. Okay. Sorry, Mr. Speak, right? From my experience, we have heard a lot about professional development, what it is, what should be done. But I think there is an area which hasn't been yet explored, what we call in the literature as the career life cycle of teachers. This area need to be explored so that we learn about different problems, hurdles, sufferings, limitations that teachers go through in profession. And there is a growing kind of burnout syndrome in our context. Professional burnout syndrome. There are teachers who burn out after 2 years teaching. So I think the question is whether this dimension is being taken into account in effort for professional development. Thank you.
Thank you. Students of Master Degree of Teaching English as a Foreign Language at the Faculty of Letters and Human Sciences in Kinitra. I'll say thank you to Mr. Larouz and his committee for organizing this lovely conference. My question is about the primary and secondary and high school teachers. Most of today's speakers have neglected primary and secondary and high school teachers because I think they related consciously or unconsciously the term professional development with professionals, those who are in the field for several years. But why? My question is, why neglecting those teachers? And they are the ones who really apply the methods and approaches and techniques exactly as they were told in the NS or CPR. Thank you very much.
Question is to the whole.
Along the lines of what was said about methods. I think that we should not go away with the idea that, I mean, what you did, I appreciate it and stand it within an approach which is critical discourse analysis of the concept of method. But we can't do without method. And I think that we should not talk about, I mean, I know what Dick Allwright wrote. I mean, he was the one who was behind this notion of killing method. You know, if a teacher is very well prepared, he can make use of any method, whatever it is. So it's not a question of age or whatever, it's a question of what we do with it. It's not what it is, but what we do with it. So I think we should not leave the impression. And besides, in your last slide, you actually revived the method implicitly by talking about what is practical, what is possible, what is... So if we have a choice of methods, then we would look for the one that would... Alternative methods. So, and if you go back to your last slides, you will discover this. Now, that was my comment. Now, my question is to our colleagues Hisham and Sitale about, you know, this notion of pragmatics and how we should care for it or take care of it within teaching English as a foreign language. Now, what would you expect of a teacher who has never set foot in a culturally sensitive, I mean, an English, purely English, culturally sensitive context, to be himself or herself, you know, aware of the things that you have been talking about, let alone imparting them to their students? You say. And I think that we should be, I mean, I totally agree with you with the argument, but in terms of feasibility and in terms of implications, because we would not expect an EFL learner, you know, to behave like an English person or an American person. In terms of appropriateness, there are degrees, there are levels of pragmatic appropriateness. You know, as long as the message goes on, you see, I think that's enough. But we should not go beyond. For example, I can't teach my students, and however professional, you know, how to understand the end statement that is typical of the English conversations. And if you go to the American interactions, again, I would agree with you on the analysis that you did. I used to do it myself and then criticizing, I mean, how we move from what is labeled as functions to teaching grammar. You see, at the end of the day, it amounts to teaching form rather than function. You see, but this level of pragmatic, I mean, what is the level that we can reach? I mean, in concrete terms, in possible terms, what can be achieved realistically?
Well, thank you. Take the ground. I give the ground to our colleague from Algeria. Most welcome to be with us. It's a great pleasure crossing the borders.
Okay, I have, though I cross the borders, I have two comments. The first one is concerning the best method. I think when my colleague said there is no best method, I think that the best method comes from the classroom. When we come to the classroom, we may come with a method, but when we come there, we may change the method. Concerning the second point, which is the death of method, I am scared sometimes when we think of death. Never say die. Never say die, even for methodology. So a method for me doesn't die. We should never say die, for it comes the day when the brain will be wanted. We may, or for me, what is a death method can be aired and becomes another new method. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I have two questions. One should be directed to the speakers. I mean, my brother, Mr. Clay, talk about pragmatics, and also to another speaker is named Hisham. So we talk about, that's the first question. It's about pragmatics, so it may interest those of you. That's for the first question. So we talk about the importance of language teaching is to make the language learner effective in his communication, to use language effectively. And actually, the learner cannot do without being able to be poetical competent. And being poetical competence involves different competencies like sociolinguistics, which go hand in glove with the pragmatics competence. That grammar also, grammatical rules. So don't you think that teaching culture could serve the task for this effectiveness in communication, and not nationally but internationally, because the failure in communication is within the overseas students. Another question should be directed, because they cannot miss the opportunity to interact with one of the successful. Your speech is all successful, but let me grab the opportunity to interact with Abdelaziz, who is in the same generation. You talk about the death of methods, sorry. You talk about the death of methods as the death of methods. But the proponent, the advocator of the post methods, even I am one of them, they escape this idea of standardization. But when we think or we consider the parameters they are aiming for, like particularity, practicality, and possibility. So the starting point turns to be so.
I'm ethically responsible for your question. If you have any questions. And time again.
Okay, I would like first to answer Professor Madouk's question. It's a very important question concerning the how to care for pragmatic knowledge in the case of a teacher who has never been in an English-speaking country. It's a very sound question. And actually it is the rationale behind the incorporation of a teacher pragmatic awareness course in teacher education. I mean, not only for that reason, but it's partly one of the reasons, because to make him aware of the pragmatic norms. And pragmatic awareness doesn't draw only on L2 pragmatic features. We assume that L1 pragmatic features are also important, because they are universal in pragmatic knowledge. Okay? Some universals. Speech act, it exists across languages and cultures. Politeness as a notion exists across languages and cultures. Cooperation exists across languages and cultures. Why don't we exploit that knowledge that the non-native speaker comes with to the EFA classroom as a student first, before being a teacher? So there is much to reflect upon and to compare it with L2 pragmatic features, which we learn, from books, from studies, and so on. When we bring these two types of knowledge symbiotically in the foreign language classroom, much is to be learned as far as pragmatic awareness is concerned. Even if for somebody who has never put his feet in an English-speaking country. Especially now, we can be exposed to English, via the media, the internet, and a lot of things, which can provide us with native speaker input. Okay, this is for the first question. And the second one, is by one of my students. She says, the impact of teacher pragmatic awareness on the learners. So everything should feed into the learner, ultimately. The teacher pragmatic awareness, will. I assume that a pragmatically aware teacher is in a better position to help his students develop pragmatic competence than a teacher who is not pragmatically aware. Pragmatically aware is to know, to be knowledgeable about the pragmatic features of the L1, pragmatic features of the L2, how they contrast, the differences, and also the interlanguage pragmatic of the learner. The teacher needs to know about the developmental stages, needs to know about all the sources of potential pragmatic errors and failures in order to be able to cope with those things in the EFF classroom. So ultimately, teacher pragmatic awareness can only be positive on the development of pragmatic competence in EFF learners.
We should not expect much from a teacher who has never been abroad, and not only who has never been abroad, but also who has never been sensitized to the importance of teaching pragmatics. I've talked to teachers about the issue, and I told them, I tried to know what they were doing with functions. And in fact, they were dealing with them as grammatical items and forms. And I asked them whether they had any in-service or pre-service training, and they said no. Unfortunately, most inspectors, they deal with reading, writing, grammar, maybe speaking. But when it comes to functions, usually I think it's relegated to the dustbin, like what they said before, Del Hines. And so I think it's high time in Morocco, if you want to move to the 21st century, we're now talking about English being the second language of Morocco, maybe in 20 years, the international language. And now at the age of YouTube, at the age of internet and podcasts and technology, I think we have an opportunity to travel abroad without going abroad. I think we have that. We have something that we didn't have when we were students. People can now just log on the internet and watch thousands of things, very interesting things, videos, tutorials. We have a lot of opportunity that we can take advantage of today. And we have to start from École Normale Supérieure. I think teachers should have the right training before they get out of the school of education if they want to be first sensitized. Then we need to have good textbooks first also, and good teacher, good TVs too, teacher textbooks, not student textbooks only. Thank you.
It's a hard task to deal with pragmaticians. They are too pragmatic. You problem with my
Thank you for your excellent remarks. I just want to say that I said that from the very beginning. I said that I'm going to use the term method and approach interchangeably and pre-validation. I said it from the very beginning. I know the Anthony model itself seemed not seem to use the term method and approach interchangeably too. I mean, there are some researchers who criticized and were dissatisfied with his model in the sense that both the term method and approach are used interchangeably. That's one. Concerning the use of the eclectic approach, if you go back, for example, to methods to language teaching, you will not find that in books the eclectic approach with specified set of principles and characteristics. There is no such thing. There is one of the limitations of the eclectic approach that it cannot be evaluated. There are no criteria against which it can be measured. It's an eclectic approach. I just want to draw the attention that there is what the methods I was talking about are those established methods constructed and conceptualized by experts in the field. And I don't want to confuse that with methodology, what teachers actually do in the classroom. That's the thing I was calling for. I was calling for a classroom-oriented research that will be more sensitive to the local experiences and the local context. And concerning services, thank you very much for your remark. I think that we need to break the dependency on Western or center-based methods. We need, for example, to go forward towards creativity. Why not create our method that will respond to the needs of our students and our learners, a locally based method created by many researchers, Moroccan researchers, and there are so many obvious. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I know one method in Morocco which is on the road. Thank you. Come on, Mr. Hassan.
And brief, I will try again to do another analogy between teaching, engaging in teaching and engaging in a marathon. What matters is not the start. What matters is the finish, to be able to reach the end. So if you are burned out, as you said, after two years, it means that you have not chosen the right job. It's like in marriage, we marry for life. As Mr. Luke said, maybe we don't have this culture of changing jobs up to now in Morocco. When we choose a job, it's forever. So when you choose a wife, it should be the best, because you spend all your life with her. Same for a job. So I would say that excuses like I'm not motivated, I'm not well paid, these are false excuses. You have to motivate yourself. The fact that I'm here today, for example, is that for a while I made a pause in my work as a teacher, and I remind myself that I'm a researcher too. And that makes a big difference for me. And I will go back to my students with batteries a little bit full of energy, so that I can face the exhausting, killing job of teaching.
But there is always a reward, as you said yourself. Thank you very much. Before we move on to the next panel, which it has its own taste and flavor, but very interesting and insightful as well, I would like to congratulate ourselves and thank ourselves for being so patient after that nice day.
To chair this session, the last session today, but please don't forget other sessions tomorrow at 8:30. So we are starting at 8:30, please. Our first speaker, actually we had a first speaker, but he apologizes for not being with us today. I hope that he's fine. He said that he is sick, so I wish him very quick and full recovery. Actually, Our first speaker is from Rabat. Am I right? Yeah. Good. And you are going to see Adil. You are going to talk about critical thinking, EFL, and teacher training. So please make it in 15 minutes. If you can't, talk just about critical thinking. And forget about teacher training.
Yeah.
Please go ahead. The floor is yours. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I would like to thank the organizing committee for this conference, for allowing this room for us to share our thoughts with you. As you may have noticed, my presentation is entitled Critical Thinking Approach to TEFL, Implications for Pedagogy and Teacher Training. So the objectives of the presentations include actually four. The first one will be giving a conceptualization of critical thinking, then the rationale for the critical thinking perspective. I'll be later talking about a number of barriers to critical thinking, the component of language competence. Then by the end I provide a number of recommendations for the implementation of critical thinking perspective at the level of pedagogy and teacher training. I start first of all by giving a number of definitions actually of critical thinking. But before that, just a number of statements about what critical thinking is not. As you see on the PowerPoint slide there, so critical thinking is not blindly reproducing learned bits of knowledge, blindly accepting face value justification, blindly believing in TV commercials or political speeches. It's not at all blindly accepting that if the textbook says it must be so, or if the authority does it, it must be right. Critical thinking is not at all this, actually. Critical thinking is, in fact, critically evaluating claims of reality, critically posing the right questions conducive of understanding, critically making creative use of acquired knowledge and skills, critically engaging problems consistently and logically, critically and open-mindedly thinking with alternative systems of thought, critically and effectively communicating with others, and critically and autonomously engaging problems and transferring skills and strategies to new situations. There are a number of definitions that have been advanced in the literature about critical thinking. I chose one that I think sums up all. So critical thinking is disciplined thinking that is clear, rational, open-minded, and informed by evidence. And it involves the mental process of actively and skillfully conceptualizing, applying, analyzing, synthesizing, and evaluating information to reach an answer or a conclusion. I will start with giving a rationale for why critical thinking perspective is important in language learning. And I will start by saying that the goal of education in general is the development of a socially viable citizens who knows how to learn, first of all, how to think for oneself, how to avoid naive acceptance of authority and steps, and how to avoid self-defeating relativism, simply the idea that everything goes without a method. In education, we only think about two things: the what, that is the content that is usually prescribed and set by, and the how, the processes of language learning. Okay, but traditionally, learning has been viewed as the accumulation of knowledge. However, this view of the accumulation of knowledge, though it has been criticized for long, it is still persistent in our learning teaching situation. And in the light of the present changes and developments in most fields, actually, the notion of accumulating knowledge, accumulating information is not possible because of the amount of information and knowledge that we have available these days. It's not practical because all that knowledge, there is no way of assimilating all that knowledge, and it's not useful to accumulate all that knowledge, and then you end up with just forgetting most of it. Critical thinking perspective actually is about the how for obtaining every educational want, and also for dealing later after school, for dealing with every societal want. In terms of language competence, there has been a number of models describing what we mean by language competence, and I'm sure you are familiar with the Canal and Swine model, dividing language competence into 4 elements: style, grammatical competence, discourse competence, linguistic competence, and strategic competence. The critical thinking component actually cuts across all these competencies. So you find at every level of language use, the learners and language users use a number of critical thinking strategies while they are using the language. And then we end up with the a third, as I said, a 5th component to language competence, which is critical thinking skills. A rationale that comes from a model that has been advanced by Gaillot in 2001 divide the critical thinking competence or critical language competence into 4 components. We have the comprehending competence, which is that students are able to understand the foreign language and culture with cognitive insight and effective empathy. There is the evaluative competence. The students are able to assess available information and critically and comparatively with learned information. And there is the last component, which is incorporating competence, which is the ability of the students to incorporate new information with old ones and their own mental scheme. Another justification for the incorporation of critical thinking skills in language teaching comes from theory and research. So as you know, the most up-to-date approaches and methods in language learning stresses the importance of meaningful learning, authentic tasks, and real-life context. And these elements are the basic premises of a critical thinking perspective to language learning. In terms of research, there has been a number of studies conducted on the effectiveness of critical thinking in language learning, and it was found that there is significant correlation between CT scores, critical thinking scores, and proficiency grades in general. There was also studies which confirmed or which showed a significant correlation between critical thinking and reading and learning comprehension. Then there are a number of other research endeavors which show that critical thinking skills can be learned. In terms of the teaching of critical thinking, for a long time it has been considered. Actually, there has never been a point in time where a teacher would say that critical thinking is actually has nothing to do with language teaching, but rather it's about the approach of the teaching of language, of critical thinking in a language program. So most of the time there was this idea of let's teach language, and the critical thinking critical thinking component can take care of itself either by being transferred from other subjects, while most of the time we have no in all education programs we have no specific course that deal with the critical thinking. So, however, this transferability hypothesis is unwarranted on a number of accounts. We can never make sure that the students before going into a language class, have a certain amount, a certain level of critical thinking. There is also no guarantee that they have been taught critical thinking elsewhere in another course, and there's also no guarantee that there are certain incentives in the language class program to push to incite the transfer of critical thinking into language learning. For this reason, the most up-to-date syllabi and programs of language teaching include pedagogical treatments of critical thinking, either indirectly through the teaching of language skills, for example, by including tasks that challenge students' thinking and requiring mental problem-solving techniques, while a number of barriers to teaching of critical thinking. The first set of barriers are learner-related. They basically relate to a number of tendencies and attitudes that most learners have. For example, egocentrism, sociocentrism, stereotyping, unwarranted assumptions, and wishful thinking, which are all of them impede in a way or another the development of critical thinking skills in learners. Other sets of barriers relate to the language, to the teaching and pedagogy. These basically refer to a vague conceptualization of critical thinking, lack of proper assessment, lack of organized sequencing teaching CT, and the threatening nature of CT practice. The threatening nature of the critical thinking practice. This is related basically to the notion or the notion or the situation of superiority, inferiority that exists between teacher and students. Usually when a teacher teaches critically or involves critical thinking in the instruction, so the teacher puts himself in front of the critique of the students, okay? Provide the students with the tools, the critical tools to criticize the way he teaches and also the what that the teacher teaches. And of course there is a lack of teacher training on how to teach critical thinking. There are another set of barriers that are related to the teachers, and these include basically attitudes. For example, certain teachers would have negative attitudes about students' ability to use critical thinking skills. They would say, for example, that the students are not mature enough or do not have the sufficient cognitive development to engage critically in learning the language. Some teacher would question the utility of teaching critical thinking in a class language, and other teacher would have various forms of egocentrism and sociocentrism that impede the teaching of critical thinking. Another barrier is the incompetence of some teachers in implementing critical thinking components in their language learning. I will move directly, because I think I don't have much time left, to the critical thinking approach to TEFL, and of course this should appear at a number of levels, at the curriculum level in terms of aims, in terms of objectives, general objectives, in terms of approach, also in the syllabus design, basically in terms of specific objective, relevant content, varied tasks. And also in classroom management, for example, creation of unthreatening atmosphere, having clear and consented rules, in addition, of course, to other things. And EFL teaching informed by critical thinking involves a number of things. For example, determining learning objectives, defining expected required learning behavior, targets behavior in high order thinking, addressing different kinds of thinking, for example, critical analysis thinking, creative centered thinking, and so on, or teaching through questioning and scaffolding, like stimulate, challenge learners' ideas, enable students to develop thinking skills instead of direct instruction. Also employing metacognitive approaches like monitoring, controlling of thought. This helps, of course, in raising awareness. Reflecting on teaching through monitoring classroom interaction activities, getting students' feedback, and also through providing feedback and assessment of learning, through continuous assessment and creating opportunities for students to self-assess. Also in terms of a number of recommendations in terms of relating to teacher training, like teacher training program should aim at updating teachers' knowledge of modern EFL theories, the principles underpinning language learning, the notion of critical thinking competence and its components, the pedagogical strategies for critical thinking instruction in English classes. I'm almost done. Training.
Remove almost, please, and say I am done.
Right, so training program should stress the principle of eclecticism, encourage teachers to be a reflective practitioner, develop the notion of teacher as actual researcher, train teachers to teach the foreign language and culture comparatively with native culture. I will conclude with just a quote by Françoise Damergy. He says, some people study all their life and at their death they have nothing to learn. They have learned everything except to think. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks, CID. We're honored to have you here, and thank you very much for all the trouble and coming along from Tizi-Ouzou. So, two speakers, and we have one who is actually Dr. Hamid Amzian, but who is the Dean of the School of the Humanities of School of Humanities and Languages in Tizi-Ouzou. Please welcome Dean Amzian. The floor is yours. We are going to talk about towards the fostering of a reflective teaching model in the EFL classroom on approach to teacher development via intercultural awareness. The floor is yours, Dean. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to start by saying an myth for Professor Larousse and his organizing committee. I'm very glad to be here in front of you. I heard the colleagues this morning, up till now, speaking about teacher development. And the conclusion is that the shift is very difficult. The shift from one policy to another is very difficult. Indeed it is. It is not surprising that it is difficult. Teachers generally teach the way they were taught. And a long time ago, up till now, we teach in one way, that is, following the Kraft model. We cannot escape safety. When we know what to teach, how to teach it, and when to teach it, we're safe. So why shifting to autonomy in which we have to be creative, in which we have to listen to our learners in order to find out ways to understand their needs and then adapt our methodology, adapt our strategies to the needs of the learners and, of course, the syllabus we have in our hands. It's so difficult to make the shift. But the shift is a necessity. Why is it a necessity? The traditional methodologies, as far as EFL teaching is concerned, focus on the linguistic and the communicative competencies. In other words, the methods and approaches, including the communicative approach, be it weak, the weak version, or the strong version, aim exclusively at the mastery of the language. So the purpose is clear. We teach the language and the learners learn the language in order to master the language and then to communicate with the language. But with the CBA, it goes further. The CBA goes beyond the mastery of the language. The CBA adds other competencies. We do not speak exclusively about the linguistic competence and the communicative competence. We have also to speak about the socio-personal competence, methodological competence, intellectual competence. This morning I heard dozens of competencies that are needed to be acquired by the learners. All these competencies have been categorized in 4 main competencies by the Quebec program. So we have the communicative competence, the intellectual competence, the socio-cultural, the socio-personal competence, and I repeat the last one, methodological competence. Why is it so? Because the objective of the educational authorities shifted from the language as a means to an end to the language, shifted from the language as an end in itself to the language as a means to an end. The end being the construction of the citizen. In other words, the construction of the conscious citizen responsible for his actions in the 21st century. To construct the citizen, the learner is not viewed through the lenses of the traditional methodologies. And the teacher or teachers have not been prepared for that objective. Teachers continue to teach for the language. So the shift is very difficult. And this is not because of the teachers. It is because of the type of policy which is implemented in the countries where the CBA and constructivism were introduced without a preparation for a period of time. In Belgium, the same failure was done or made. Launching the reform without a policy of teacher development. In Algeria, same thing. In Tunisia, now, 2 years of preparation for the whole staff, teachers, heads of schools, the administrative staff, all these were put into a program which helped everybody to adjust himself to the reform before it was launched. This is a very difficult shift. c'est peut-être parce que je suis un peu vieux.